The history of the United States is a vast and complex tale, spanning over centuries and involving a multitude of peoples, events, and ideas. This video will serve as a very condensed overview, highlighting the key moments and themes that have shaped the country. Pre-colonial and Native American societies. Before the arrival of Europeans, the land now known as the United States was home to a multitude of Native American tribes, each with its own culture, language, and way of life. These societies were diverse and sophisticated, ranging from the complex urban centers of the Mississippian culture, such as Cahokia, to the intricate political systems of the Iroquois Confederacy in the northeast. In the southwest, the ancestral Puebloans built impressive cliff dwellings and pueblos, while the plains tribes like the Sioux and Comanche were known for their nomadic lifestyle, centered around buffalo hunting. These indigenous peoples had rich spiritual traditions, complex social structures, and economies based on agriculture, hunting, and trade. They managed the land sustainably, using techniques such as controlled burns and crop rotation to ensure the health of their ecosystems. However, their way of life would be dramatically altered with the arrival of European explorers and settlers. European exploration and colonization, 1492 to 1763. The arrival of Christopher Columbus in 1492 marked the beginning of European exploration and colonization in the Americas. Over the next century, Spanish, French, and English explorers established colonies across the continent. The Spanish were the first to establish a significant presence, founding settlements in what is now Florida, the Southwest, and California. They sought wealth through the exploitation of natural resources and the conversion of Native Americans to Christianity. The French established colonies in the northern regions, particularly in present-day Canada and the Mississippi River Valley, focusing on fur trading and building alliances with Native American tribes. The English, meanwhile, founded the first permanent colony at Jamestown, Virginia, in 1607. This marked the beginning of the 13 British colonies along the eastern seaboard, which would become the foundation of the United States. The early years of the English colonies were marked by hardship, conflict with Native Americans, and a dependence on the transatlantic slave trade to sustain their economies. Over time, these colonies developed distinct regional identities. New England with its Puritan roots and focus on trade and education, the middle colonies with their diverse populations and religious tolerance, and the southern colonies with their plantation economies reliant on enslaved labor. The road to independence, 1763 to 1783. By the mid-18th century, tensions between the British government and its American colonies began to escalate. The British had accrued significant debt during the 7 Years' War, 1756-1763, and sought to recoup these costs by taxing the colonies. The Stamp Act of 1765 and the Townshend Acts of 1767 imposed taxes on various goods and services, leading to widespread resentment among colonists who had no representation in Parliament. This period of growing discontent saw the rise of revolutionary sentiment, fueled by Enlightenment ideas about liberty, democracy, and self-governance. The Boston Massacre in 1770 and the Boston Tea Party in 1773 were flashpoints that galvanized public opinion against British rule. In 1774, the First Continental Congress convened, bringing together representatives from the colonies to discuss a unified response to British policies. In April 1775, the first shots of the American Revolution were fired at Lexington and Concord in Massachusetts. Over the next 8 years, the colonies waged a war for independence against one of the world's most powerful empires. The Declaration of Independence, adopted on July 4, 1776, articulated the colony's desire for self-governance and outlined the principles of equality and individual rights that would become the foundation of the new nation. Under the leadership of General George Washington, the Continental Army achieved several key victories, culminating in the British surrender at Yorktown in 1781. The Treaty of Paris, signed in 1783, officially ended the war and recognized the independence of the United States. The founding of the Republic, 1783 to 1815. With independence secured, the fledgling nation faced the daunting task of creating a stable and effective government. The Articles of Confederation, adopted during the war, proved inadequate due to their lack of a strong central authority. In 1787, delegates from the states convened in Philadelphia to draft a new constitution, which established a federal system with a separation of powers between the executive, legislative, and judicial branches. The Constitution was ratified in 1788, and the following year, George Washington was unanimously elected as the first President of the United States. The Bill of Rights, the first 10 amendments to the Constitution, was added in 1791 to protect individual liberties and address concerns about federal overreach. During Washington's presidency, the new government faced several challenges, including foreign threats, internal rebellions, and debates over economic policy. The establishment of a national bank, the handling of the Whiskey Rebellion, and the negotiation of the Jay Treaty with Britain were among the key issues of the era. The United States continued to expand its territory and influence, acquiring the Louisiana Territory from France in 1803. This purchase doubled the size of the nation and opened vast new lands for exploration and settlement. The Lewis and Clark expedition, 1804-1806, mapped much of the newly acquired territory and provided valuable information about the western frontier. However, the early 19th century was also marked by tensions with Britain, leading to the War of 1812. Often called the Second War of Independence, the conflict was fueled by British restrictions on American trade and the impressment of American sailors. The war ended in a stalemate, but it reinforced American national identity and solidified the United States' independence on the global stage. Westward expansion and the Age of Jackson, 1815 to 1850. The period following the War of 1812 was marked by a sense of optimism and national unity, often referred to as the era of good feelings. However, this era was also characterized by rapid westward expansion, driven by the ideology of manifest destiny, the belief that Americans were destined to expand across the continent. The admission of new states, such as Missouri and Texas, and the displacement of Native American tribes through treaties and military force were hallmarks of this period. The Indian Removal Act of 1830, championed by President Andrew Jackson, led to the forced relocation of thousands of Native Americans to territories west of the Mississippi River, a journey known as the Trail of Tears. Economic and social changes were also significant during this time. The Industrial Revolution began to take hold in the United States, particularly in the Northeast, leading to the growth of factories, cities, and new transportation networks like canals and railroads. The cotton gin, invented by Eli Whitney in 1793, revolutionized the Southern economy, making cotton the dominant crop and increasing the demand for enslaved labor. Jacksonian democracy, named after Andrew Jackson, emphasized greater participation in government by the common man and sought to reduce the influence of the wealthy elite. However, this period also saw the rise of sectional tensions over issues such as slavery, tariffs, and states' rights, which would eventually lead to the Civil War. The Civil War and Reconstruction, 1861 to 1877. By the mid-19th century, the United States was deeply divided over the issue of slavery. The Southern economy relied heavily on enslaved labor, while the North was increasingly industrialized and had abolished slavery. The election of Abraham Lincoln in 1860, a Republican who opposed the expansion of slavery into new territories, prompted several Southern states to secede from the Union, forming the Confederate States of America. The Civil War began in April 1861, when Confederate forces attacked Fort Sumter in South Carolina. The conflict was the deadliest in American history, with over 600,000 soldiers losing their lives. Key battles included Antietam, Gettysburg, and Vicksburg, and the war saw the use of new military technologies such as ironclad ships, railroads, and telegraphs. In 1863, Lincoln issued the Emancipation Proclamation, which declared all enslaved people in Confederate-held territory to be free. This shifted the war's focus to include the abolition of slavery as a central goal. The Union's victory at Gettysburg in 1863 and the fall of Atlanta in 1864 marked turning points in the war, leading to the eventual surrender of Confederate General Robert E. Lee at Appomattox Courthouse in April 1865. The end of the war ushered in the Reconstruction era, a turbulent period of rebuilding the South and integrating formerly enslaved people into American society. The 13th Amendment, ratified in 1865, abolished slavery, while the 14th and 15th Amendments granted citizenship and voting rights to African Americans. However, Reconstruction faced significant challenges, including violent resistance from white supremacist groups like the Ku Klux Klan and the imposition of black codes that sought to limit the rights of African Americans. Despite some progress, Reconstruction ultimately failed to achieve full equality, and the Compromise of 1877, which ended federal intervention in the South, led to the rise of Jim Crow laws and segregation. Industrialization and the Gilded Age, 1877 to 1900. The late 19th century was a period of rapid industrialization and urbanization in the United States. Known as the Gilded Age, this era saw the rise of powerful industrialists like John D. Rockefeller, Andrew Carnegie, and J.P. Morgan, who amassed vast fortunes through industries such as oil, steel, and finance. Their influence extended into politics, leading to widespread corruption and the perception that government served the interests of the wealthy elite. The Gilded Age was also marked by significant social and economic inequality. While some Americans enjoyed unprecedented wealth, many others, including immigrants, factory workers, and farmers, faced harsh working conditions, low wages, and long hours. Labor unions began to form in response, advocating for workers' rights through strikes and protests. The Haymarket Riot of 1886 and the Pullman Strike of 1894 were among the most notable labor conflicts of the era. Urbanization transformed American society as millions of people moved from rural areas to cities in search of work. The rapid growth of cities like New York, Chicago, and San Francisco led to overcrowded living conditions, inadequate infrastructure, and public health crises. The influx of immigrants from Europe and Asia also fueled nativist sentiments and led to restrictive immigration laws, such as the Chinese Exclusion Act of 1882. Despite these challenges, the Gilded Age was also a time of technological innovation and cultural change. The invention of the telephone, the electric light bulb, and the automobile revolutionized daily life, while the spread of public education and the rise of mass media helped to create a more informed and connected society. The Progressive Era and World War I, 1900 to 1919. In response to the social and economic issues of the Gilded Age, the early 20th century saw the rise of the progressive movement. Progressives sought to address the excesses of industrial capitalism through government regulation, social reform, and political change. Key figures of the era included Presidents Theodore Roosevelt and Woodrow Wilson, as well as activists like Jane Addams and Webb Du Bois. Progressive reforms included antitrust laws to break up monopolies, labor protections such as child labor laws and workplace safety regulations, and efforts to improve public health and education. The movement also sought to expand democracy through measures like the direct election of senators, 17th Amendment, and women's suffrage, 19th Amendment. The United States' involvement in World War I marked a significant turning point in its role on the global stage. The war began in 1914, but the US remained neutral until 1917, when German unrestricted submarine warfare and the Zimmermann telegram prompted President Wilson to ask Congress for a declaration of war. American troops played a crucial role in the final year of the conflict, helping to tip the balance in favor of the Allies. The war had a profound impact on American society, leading to economic growth, technological advancements, and changes in gender roles as women entered the workforce in large numbers. However, it also brought about challenges, including the Spanish flu pandemic, labor unrest, and the Red Scare, a period of intense fear of communism and radicalism, the Roaring Twenties and the Great Depression, 1920 to 1939. The 1920s, known as the Roaring Twenties, were a decade of economic prosperity, cultural change and social upheaval. The post-war economy boomed, fueled by consumer spending. Technological innovations like the radio and the automobile, and the stock market's rapid growth. The decade also saw the rise of mass entertainment with jazz music, Hollywood films, and sports becoming central to American culture. However, the 1920s were also marked by significant social tensions, including prohibition, which banned the sale of alcohol, leading to the rise of organized crime. The decade also saw the resurgence of the Ku Klux Klan, as well as widespread racial violence, including the Tulsa Race Massacre of 1921. The economic prosperity of the 1920s came to a sudden end with the stock market crash of 1929, which triggered the Great Depression, the worst economic downturn in U.S. history. The collapse of the banking system, mass unemployment, and widespread poverty devastated American society. President Herbert Hoover's response was widely criticized as inadequate, leading to the election of Franklin D. Roosevelt in 1932. Roosevelt's New Deal programs sought to provide relief, recovery, and reform through government intervention in the economy. Initiatives like the Social Security Act, the Civilian Conservation Corps, and the Works Progress Administration aimed to create jobs, support the unemployed, and stabilize the economy. While the New Deal had a significant impact, the Depression persisted throughout the 1930s, and it was the onset of World War II that ultimately revived the U.S. economy. World War II and the Post-War Era, 1941 to 1960. The United States entered World War II after the Japanese attack on Pearl Harbor on December 7, 1941. The war effort mobilized the entire nation, with millions of men and women serving in the military, and millions more working in factories to produce weapons, vehicles, and supplies. The war also led to significant social changes, including the internment of Japanese Americans and the increased participation of women and African Americans in the workforce. The U.S. played a crucial role in the Allied victory, contributing to key campaigns in Europe and the Pacific. The D-Day invasion of Normandy in 1944 and the Battle of Midway in 1942 were pivotal moments in the war. The Holocaust, the genocide of 6 million Jews and millions of others by Nazi Germany, remains one of the darkest chapters in human history. In August 1945, the US dropped atomic bombs on the Japanese cities of Hiroshima and Nagasaki, leading to Japan's surrender and the end of World War II. The war had a profound impact on the world, leading to the creation of the United Nations and the beginning of the Cold War, a period of geopolitical tension between the United States and the Soviet Union. The post-war era was marked by economic prosperity, the expansion of the middle class, and the rise of the suburbs. The GI Bill provided veterans with access to education and home loans, fueling a housing boom and the growth of higher education. However, the era was also marked by the beginning of the Civil Rights Movement, as African Americans and other marginalized groups began to demand equality and justice. The Civil Rights Movement and Social Change, 1950s to 1970s. The Civil Rights Movement was one of the most significant social movements in American history, seeking to end racial segregation and discrimination against African Americans. The movement was marked by landmark legal victories, such as the Supreme Court's decision in Brown v. Board of Education, 1954, which declared segregated schools unconstitutional. Non-violent protests such as the Montgomery bus boycott, 1955-1956, the Freedom Rides, 1961, and the March on Washington, 1963, were central to the movement. Leaders like Martin Luther King Jr., Rosa Parks, and Malcolm X played pivotal roles in advocating for civil rights and inspiring change. The movement achieved significant legislative victories, including the Civil Rights Act of 1964, which outlawed segregation in public places and banned employment discrimination, and the Voting Rights Act of 1965, which aimed to eliminate barriers to voting for African Americans. However, the movement also faced violent opposition, including police brutality, bombings, and assassinations, most notably the assassination of Martin Luther King Jr. in 1968. The 1960s and 1970s were also a time of social and cultural change, with the rise of the feminist movement, the LGBTQ+ rights movement, and the anti-Vietnam War movement. The counterculture of the 1960s, symbolized by events like the Woodstock Festival and the Summer of Love, challenged traditional values and promoted ideals of peace, love, and freedom. The modern era, 1980s, present. The late 20th and early 21st centuries have been characterized by significant political, economic, and technological changes. The election of Ronald Reagan in 1980 marked a shift toward conservative policies, including tax cuts, deregulation, and a strong stance against the Soviet Union. The 1980s also saw the rise of the technology industry, with the personal computer revolution and the advent of the Internet. The end of the Cold War in 1991, marked by the dissolution of the Soviet Union, left the United States as the world's sole superpower. The 1990s were a time of economic growth and technological innovation, with the rise of the Internet, globalization, and the dot-com boom. The 21st century began with the September 11, 2001, terrorist attacks, which had a profound impact on the United States and the world. The attacks led to the war on terror, including the wars in Afghanistan and Iraq, and significant changes in domestic security policies, such as the creation of the Department of Homeland Security and the passage of the USA Patriot Act. The Great Recession of 2008 to 2009 was a global financial crisis that led to widespread economic hardship, prompting government interventions such as the Troubled Asset Relief Program, TARP, and the American Recovery and Reinvestment Act. The election of Barack Obama in 2008, the first African-American president, was a historic moment that brought hope for change, but also highlighted the deep political divisions within the country. The 2010s and 2020s have been marked by continued political polarization, debates over issues like healthcare, immigration and climate change, and significant social movements such as Black Lives Matter and the #MeToo movement. The COVID-19 pandemic, which began in 2019, has had a profound impact on public health, the economy and daily life, challenging the nation in unprecedented ways. All in all, the history of the United States is a story of constant change and evolution, marked by struggles for freedom, equality, and prosperity. From its indigenous roots to its rise as a global superpower, the United States has been shaped by diverse peoples, transformative ideas, and monumental events. As the nation continues to navigate the complexities of the modern world, its history serves as a reminder of the enduring principles of democracy, liberty, and justice that have defined the American experience.